online, on the TuneIn app,
and on your smart speaker.
Play Shock Radio.
This is the sound of Salford.
Shock Radio News.
It's the Shock Radio News show with Alfie Mulcahy, Alfie Garner and Benny Fiddimore. Your headlines at just gone 7 o'clock. A woman has been jailed over the deaths of 4 people who drowned during an organised paddleboarding trip in Pembrokeshire. Nerys Lloyd has been accused of being unqualified to lead the tour and failed to get consent forms. Donald Trump has made a long social media post attacking Ukraine's leader Volodymyr Zelensky, who he says is prolonging a killing field. The US president claims a deal on ending the war with Russia is close, and Volodymyr can choose between peace or 3 more years of fighting before losing his country. A man who stabbed a 9-year-old girl in Dorset has been jailed for 30 years for her attempted murder. It happened just 3 weeks after the Southport killings, which Jordan Wilkes, who's 29, had researched beforehand. The Chancellor says that while she's not in a rush to do a trade deal with the US, she's confident that one can be reached without watering down food standards. Rachel Reeves is currently in Washington. And mourners have remarked on the stillness inside St. Peter's Basilica, where Pope Francis is lying in state. The Vatican is considering extending hours for the public to file past his open coffin to bring down the currently 8-hour-long queues.
Shock Radio weather.
There'll be a small number of heavy showers at first this evening, but places will mostly stay dry this evening and overnight, with lows of 8 degrees across Manchester. Well, you are listening to the Shock News Show today with Alfie Mulcahy, Alfie Garner and Benny Fiddimore. We are going to start by talking about British Steel. Over the Easter break, Parliament was recalled for an emergency sitting on a Saturday to pass an emergency bill to bring British Steel under the control of the UK government. They were forced to take over from Chinese owners Xingji to prevent them shutting down the blast furnaces. They were called back from their Easter break, and it's the first time that they've been recalled on a Saturday since the Falklands War. And it was last recalled from a break in 2021 to discuss the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. They also sat on both a Saturday and a Sunday on the outbreak of World War II in 1939. Sir Keir Starmer said in a statement that the legislation would allow ministers to take control of the site in Scunthorpe. The Prime Minister has outlined how this would work. And we do have a clip. Hang on.
We will pass emergency legislation in one day to give the Business Secretary the powers to do everything possible to stop the closure of these blast furnaces. What we're doing tomorrow is passing legislation to take control of the plant and to preserve all viable options. It does mean all options are on the table.
So all options are on the table, and one of those options is a full nationalisation, moving to a full nationalisation of the company that is British Steel. What do you guys think? Do you think that's something that we could see, a full nationalisation? Because what we've got at the moment is a sort of partial state.
So anything could happen right now. I mean, the government have, for now, taken over control of the Scunthorpe Steel. However, they're saying, all options are on the table, of course. I think it's an emergency measure they've taken here, possibly a permanent one, but they had to do it because it's 2,700 jobs at risk. And, for years we've spoken about the North-South divide, we've spoken about levelling up. Losing 2,700 jobs in a town like Scunthorpe, it's not going to do their local economy any good. So potentially it's a permanent solution, but for now I think it's an emergency one, and we're not really sure what's going to happen next.
And what we're seeing here is, obviously, for now, temporary. It could become permanent. It could be sold off to another company. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have now a cycle of it being sold to a company, coming back into public ownership, back to another company. It could start a turning cycle. For now, it seems the government's plans are make sure those jobs are secure, whether it is at the plant or somewhere else in Scunthorpe, so they're not damaging that local economy, but also so they are stable in their mission to sort of decrease the use of benefits throughout the country. They need to sort of make sure that they will protect jobs in the industry, because although it's not a massive industry for us necessarily. It has got strengths because it does give us other ways of getting finances throughout the UK economy.
I think it's also important to note that it's definitely a temporary measure for now, because if they are doing a Saturday sitting and in the middle of a recess of all things, then it just shows how this is an emergency quick fix for now.
Yeah, well, what we've kind of heard from lots of people within the Labour Party is that they're currently looking for a commercial partner to enter into a joint venture with the government, so the government can work alongside a private company for the future of the plant and for the future of the company. However, Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said he wouldn't bring a Chinese company back into our steel industry.
The US has some very assertive measures in place to China, but they do have political engagement. So I think the balance was wrong. I think you've got to be clear about what is the sort of sector where actually we can promote and cooperate, and ones, frankly, where we can't. I wouldn't personally bring a Chinese company into our steel sector.
He then visited the site and went back on his statement by not ruling out future investment from China into Britain's steel sector.
In this case, our difference of opinion on the future was with a specific company. I know there's a lot of interest in the wider UK-China relationship, understandably so, but this was about this company. A lot of the issues in the global economy with steel come from overproduction and dumping of steel products, and that does come from China. So I think you would look at a Chinese firm in a different way. But I'm really keen to stress the action we've taken here was to step in because it was one specific company that I felt wasn't acting in the UK's national interest.
And the legislation, as we've got it so far, it hasn't given the ministers power to fully nationalise, and it hasn't given them yet the power to enter into a joint venture. They'd need another bill. Another bill would need to be voted on there in order for them to go down either of those paths. As we were saying earlier, the Industry Minister, Sarah Jones, has said that her current preference would be for private investment alongside public funding in that industry, but there wasn't a company that they were currently looking for. Do you think that there'll be an issue trying to get hold of investment, finding people to enter into this industry if this previous company has failed in their job to keep it going?
I think it definitely puts other companies off, considering it hasn't worked for this Chinese company in question. However, I think the idea from the government that they want to kind of blend with a private company is probably a good idea because it gives it long-term security. But yeah, you are right in saying that it's probably going to be hard to attract people, considering this company have, gone as far as saying they'd shut it down.
100%. But also there's still that chance that a company is willing to take on. This plant's been open for hundreds of years under different owners. The last owners owned it for about 15, 20. So there is that chance that a company would see that and be like, maybe it was just poor management from this company. Maybe it was just during the COVID, they didn't really recover. There is a potential that a company could come in and be like, actually, we think we could make this recover very well, add to the UK economy and work with the government to sort of impose that and make it fundamental to not only the British economy, but also the economy in Scunthorpe.
Well, since Xingji brought British Steel in 2020, they've invested £1.2 billion in the company to try and maintain operations, but they've said that they're suffering £700,000 of losses a day, and that they've been suffering that over the last couple of years. So I think companies will maybe see this, how much money they're losing, and see that as a big warning sign not to want to enter into any sort of arrangement with the company. The government has offered £500 million of support to partly fund a switch from blast furnaces to more energy efficient electric, they're called arc furnaces, but the offer has been, it was previously rejected by that company. So maybe we'll see, under public ownership, investment into newer technologies to try and move our steel industry along and also keep up with the government's green pledges.
We've got this target of net zero for 2050, and I think, it definitely will change how steel is produced and how steel is used. So it's hard to look at the current figures and think, oh, this is going to be the outlook for the next few years, because the steel industry is going to be forced to change. I mean, you've already said the government are investing money in the switch. So it's I think that's also another problem for private companies. It's unpredictable what the future of British steel is at this point.
I think there's a potential that rather than nationalise right now, there's a chance. Rather than find a new company to buy from right now, nationalise for now, improve the company, improve the image that it has, sort of make it more green, make it more of an opportunity rather than a self-certified death, essentially. Get that done, and then potentially in the next few years, when everything's sort of growing again, that company's doing well, sell off again. Sort of the thing that we saw when Margaret Thatcher was in charge, when she was seeing all these companies doing well, sell them off to shareholders and just keep them under public watch, sort of thing.
Well, what we've heard from a lot of people criticising the Labour government, going, why now? Because British Steel, especially the Scunthorpe plant, has been struggling for months. It was discussed in the Commons about a month before we got to this emergency meeting. One of the reasons is because those blast furnaces that they use, once they go out, they're very, very hard to get back up and running. They run at 2,000 degrees centigrade, and it takes a very long while to start up a blast furnaces. The two in Scunthorpe are called Bess and Anne, which I think is brilliant. We've also heard from Shocked's very own Adam Skin. He's from Scunthorpe, and he thinks that the site should be closed down.
As a local person from Scunthorpe, my controversial opinion, it's hard to say, but is to let them shut it down. Because they publicly came out and said they're running at £700,000 a day loss. That's every single day. And now the government are going to pay for that. Well, where have they found that 700 grand a day from? You know, that could be better spent paying for the NHS or put it back into the education system.
Well, Reform UK disagrees, and they're calling for British Steel to be nationalised, which is quite opposite to people's general perceptions of reform, but they're calling for it to be fully nationalised until a buyer can be found. The Green Party is also in favour of nationalisation and a switch to green steel production. The Tories and the Lib Dems have both said that other options should be considered first. Jeremy Corbyn has also said that the government should not only nationalise the Scunthorpe plant, but all steel making across the UK. So we've got this kind of situation where we have our furthest right party and the Greens wrapping round and agreeing on nationalisation of a huge public asset.
Yeah, I was quite shocked when I saw putting something under public ownership on the Reform UK account a couple of weeks ago. It wasn't what I expected to see. But I suppose Reform, they try to appeal to like the working class voter, the working man, as Farage likes to make his persona. So I suppose these are working people, aren't they? 2,700 working people at a steel plant. I just want to mention, though, if it's £700,000 loss a day, Adam Skin makes a very good point. Where is that money coming from? And it's a case of, it's a balancing act. 2,700 jobs, there's a lot of people out of work, but £700,000 loss a day, it's a very difficult situation. So whether that should be taken under the public purse, I think it's very interesting that Reform have gone down this line, because I would have expected them to be more conservative with money than just spending it every day, on this steel plant. So it is a surprise to see, the Greens and Reform, but I imagine they both want privatisation, but Reform probably wants to keep it as business as usual at this steel plant, whereas the Greens have probably got an idea for a complete overhaul of how operations are working there.
And you said it there, like they have very different views usually, but they're saying the same thing. I think potentially Reform want to see the nationalisation again to protect the workers, but also sort of to inadvertently say to the rest of Europe that actually we are doing good. We are really good at industry, like we always used to be. We don't regret leaving the EU, because that's his still main point.
True.
He always goes back to the Brexit. I think the fact that the next two biggest parties in the House of Commons are still saying that it shouldn't be nationalised or there's options available says a lot about how sort of the House thinks about the change potentially to one of the biggest industries that we've ever had in the UK.
Well, we have just had some breaking news come through. India has completely closed all border crossings with Pakistan. They've announced measures targeting Pakistan after a gunman attacked, killing 26 people in Indian-administrated Kashmir. It includes the closure of the main border crossing between the two countries and a couple of auxiliary ones as well, and the suspension of their water sharing treaty in the area. We'll have more on that maybe a little bit later on as we get it, but India has began to completely close their border with Pakistan after a gunman attacked 26 people in Kashmir.
They also seem to have cancelled some of the visas held by Pakistanis and ordered holders to leave within 2 days, while demanding that the sort of support cross-border terrorism, something that it's been denied by multiple sides.
Yeah, well, we're gonna park that for now. And for years in this country, there's been a debate over sex and gender. And while we were away over Easter, the Supreme Court made a decision on the definition of a woman. 5 judges at the highest court in the land were unanimous in that the legal definition of a woman is based purely on biological sex. The long-running legal challenge centres around how sex-based rights are applied to the UK-wide Equality Act, and the judges were asked to rule on what the legislation meant by sex, whether biological sex or certificated sex as legally defined by the 2004 Gender Recognition Act. They unanimously decided that the definition of a woman and sex in the Equality Act of 2010 refers to a biological woman and biological sex. We've had a lot of information out about this. It's very, very finicky legal text, what we've got, and it does only apply to the Equality Act and not the European Convention on Human Rights. That's something that activist groups have made very clear over the last few weeks since we got this Supreme Court announcement. You've both been following this over Easter. What are your opinions on what we've seen?
I think it was brought to the High Court after a group in Scotland who campaigned for single-sex spaces, but it was brought the government to court against one of the legislations they had planned. It says a lot about, over the last few years, the difference that people have been arguing. Does a trans woman mean a woman? Does a trans man mean a man? There's a lot of there was a lot of discourse behind that. So the aim of this was to clear that up, as well as give the case a rest. So we've now got from the courts basically saying we see a biological female can be trans and become a trans man, but they are still biological female, if that makes sense.
Very, very controversial issue, of course, in the UK over the past few years. Yes, this court ruling was made to give clarity, but I don't know whether it's going to stop that debate. In fact, I think it's just going to enrage the debate further. I think it's still a very controversial matter. Many people are going to be, people already are up in arms about it. I don't think this issue is going away. I think the intention was to kind of, and in fact the Prime Minister said today, was to ease the temperature. However, I don't think this is going to be the case, because for Women Scotland, there was scenes last week in London of them being incredibly joyous over the ruling, which has upset a lot of people in London as well. So I don't think it puts the issue to bed. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it puts fuel to the fire. And I think we're definitely in a world of culture wars, and that's going to carry on for years to come. That's my view on it.
And what we should say is that this is an appeal case that was taken to the Supreme Court, and it was brought against the Scottish government. It was by a group called For Women Scotland, and it follows an unsuccessful challenge at the Court of Session in Edinburgh. For Women Scotland has called on the court to find sex an immutable biological state, arguing that sex-based protections, as underlined in the Equality Act, should only apply to people born female. So in order for that to have been passed by the Supreme Court, what they've done is they've said clarified the definition of the word woman in that Equality Act. But let's listen to Lord Hodge delivering that ruling at the London court last Wednesday.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
Something else that has been pointed out, and I think is quite telling, is that we only got those clarifications, as they've said, on the words woman and sex. This doesn't change the status of a transgender man in the eyes of the law. So it kind of shows how one-sided the debate can be. Do either of you think we'll see the Supreme Court go back and make a ruling on the word man, or do you think there's not enough appetite there for that sort of case to be brought?
I don't think we've got a big enough case for it, and I don't think many people are actually as passionate about. It's not the same. It's not really the same. So I don't think that there'll be any rush for that to happen from the Supreme Court. However, I do also think that because it only covers women and sex and not men and sex, I think again that's why I'm not convinced that this has really clarified anything, because it is only one side of gender.
And for transgender individuals, some of them, transgender men, transgender women, they are no longer allowed to use women's spaces and women's toilets under the Equality Act, but because the definition of a man hasn't been amended, there will be situations where transgender women feel very unsafe going into a men's toilet. So it's left us in this kind of limbo in the law. Today in PMQs we heard Tory leader Kemi Badenoch accusing the Prime Minister of being scared for not speaking out on the ruling sooner.
He hid for 6 days without commenting on the Supreme Court judgment. Why did it take him so long to respond?
She held the post of Minister for Women and Equalities for 2 years, and she did precisely nothing.
We've also heard from the Social Justice Secretary, Shirley-Ann Somerville, and she said they will take time to consider the ruling.
The pursuit of equality for women and for trans people is our collective responsibility. All of us in this chamber must ensure that the rights and dignity of all are upheld, and our debate must be rooted in empathy, compassion and equality.
We're going to move on now to discuss one of the biggest stories of this week. Earlier this week, on Easter Monday, we heard the sad news about the passing of Pope Francis, the 266th leader of the Catholic Church. He died at the age of 88. He saw a rise in the global population of Catholics and the diversification of the College of Cardinals. At 88, Pope Francis ended his term of office as the second oldest among all popes from the last 500 years. He was also among the oldest to begin his papacy when he was chosen by the College of Cardinals, the senior leadership tier of the Church, in 2013. He diverged from the previous Pope Benedict and his other predecessors on many contentious issues within the Church, and more openly embraced LGBTQ individuals, although stopped short of full acceptance. He also decried climate change and called publicly for a ceasefire in Gaza, as well as apologising for the Church's role in colonisation in Latin America and for the various sexual assault cases brought against Catholic priests the world over. This is a big moment globally, and possibly a bigger moment globally than when we saw the passing of the Queen a couple of years ago.
Yeah, because the Catholic Church traditionally has been seen as quite a closed clique group with, very, very traditionalist views. With the Pope kind of opening it up, particularly to gay people and LGBTQ people, the fact that he was willing to welcome them into the church, in the figures state it, the expansion of the Catholic Church, it definitely shows that instead of past traditionalism, he's definitely been a progressive leader. And I think it would be quite hard to find somebody as progressive as Francis. So, it definitely will see. Whereas the Queen was, the Queen's not a leader as such; she's a figurehead. But he actually made changes, and he influenced the way things were happening. Whereas the Queen didn't really influence the state of the country, if you know what I mean. Yeah, it wasn't she didn't set the mood, she didn't set the agenda. Whereas the Pope has more opportunity to do that.
And you said it there. A lot of people saw him as the Pope who wanted change. A survey back in 2020 of British Catholics said 50% of them believed he represented change for the better. 7% said he signalled change for the worse. So it kind of does put into real context how much Catholics saw this Pope as not one that just followed tradition, but really wanted to sort of improve the both public perception of the religion, but also of the church itself, to sort of be like, actually, we welcome the changes within society.
Well, Pope Francis was born Jorge Bergoglio, and he selected his papal name in honour of St. Francis of Assisi. He was an Italian friar who rejected his wealthy upbringing by taking a vow of poverty. And I think that kind of signifies what Pope Francis has tried to do over his tenure. His death was announced less than 24 hours after he left an Easter Sunday address in front of thousands of worshippers in St. Peter's Square. He'd experienced a string of health worries in recent years and spent 38 days in hospital earlier this year. Father Gabriel Romanelli says the Pope called Gaza's only Catholic church every day, even whilst he was in hospital.
More than 1 year and a half, and he called every day. He asked to us to help the people, to protect the children. So, in the name of the Lord and the church, we try to continue to give this message.
His funeral is due to be on Saturday in front of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City, and ahead of the funeral, his body is currently lying in state in an open casket, and members of the public have been paying their respects. He'll be the first pope in more than a century not to be buried inside the Vatican itself. Instead, he's chosen to be laid to rest in Rome's Basilica of St. Mary Major. A 9-day mourning period known as the Novem Dies will then begin across the Catholic Church. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been among global leaders paying tribute, as has US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. French President Emmanuel Macron has also said he will attend the funeral, as has the President of Argentina, the Pope's former home country. And representing the royals, the British royals, will be the Prince of Wales. How do you guys kind of see this as a change in the Catholic Church? Do you think this is a big moment internationally, and how can you see this going forward?
It's a massive change internationally, and what we'll see is sort of over the next few weeks, the new Pope get elected. But we're also now seeing sort of not only people from different countries, but people from different religions go in there, paying their respects to who they respect to be someone who fought hard for his church. So, we're seeing people who are usually from a Christian church or a Christian country going to the Vatican, pay their respects to someone they've probably worked with in the past, and so say, it's not our religion that separates us, because it would never separate us, because that's not religion. That's not what religion is about.
I think the fact that he was willing to obviously talk to other people as well as just those within his own church and try and use his church for the greater good of the world. I think the fact that he was calling the only Catholic church in Gaza every single day, even when he was in hospital, shows how dedicated he was. So to match that dedication is going to be really difficult for whoever does take over, and that will signify change.
And we're going to take a quick look now into what happens next. So Cardinal Farrell, who's currently standing in for the Pope, he has sealed the Pope's home within the Vatican City, destroyed his papal ring and lead seal, which was used to authenticate official documents. He can become Pope, but it's only ever happened twice in history. The new Pope will be elected by the College of Cardinals, and there are currently 252 of them, but only 135 can cast ballots in what's called a conclave. It doesn't start until after the mourning period has finished. And during the voting period, the cardinals are completely sealed off from the outside world, denied their phones, access to the internet or newspapers, anything like that. They all sleep within the Vatican City in a special guest house. And once they've finished a round of voting, they burn the ballots. Big cloud of smoke across Rome. If it's black smoke, it means they've finished that round of voting. If it's white smoke, it means a final decision has been made. It's a very almost archaic ritual, but it's very much a part of Vatican life.
And it's one of these few things that remains traditional, and it probably always will remain traditional within the Catholic Church, is how they elect a pope. It's always an elected pope. So it sort of brings back, even though Pope Francis was a really progressive person, it brings back this idea that it brings back to the point of they still have traditional values within it.
And also, the fact is that it's very much like the coronation or the Queen's funeral. I mean, it's when the British show off loads of traditional things, which normally, we're not really used to seeing because they are so traditional. But fantastic. I mean, it's great to see the traditions being upheld.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to park that for now. Next Thursday are the local elections across the UK. 23 councils and 6 mayors across England. And most of the councils up for election are county councils, so like Lancashire and Kent. They're looking after services including social care, education, road maintenance and libraries, and more than 1,600 councillors are due to be elected. There's also a Westminster seat that's being contested, that's Runcorn and Helsby, and that's after the resignation of Mike Amesbury, who was convicted earlier this year of assaulting a constituent and given a 10-week prison sentence. That seat's only been in existence since last year's general election. Labour got 52.9% of the vote, and Reform came in second with 18% of the vote. So I'm going to ask you two now, what are your predictions for the local elections? What do you think we're going to see? And will Keir Starmer currently be looking quite worried looking to next week?
I mean, the polls have not been positive at all. And, there's been a lot of kind of surprise moves from a Labour government, cutting the winter payment, the massive welfare cuts, tax rises. It's not been a year. I mean, it's always going to be tough in the first year. You're going to have to make those difficult decisions. They've not been popular. The polls are showing that Reform are skyrocketing in the polls in a way that none of us probably could have expected. And I love this time of year. It's I find it so exciting. And I think Runcorn and Helsby is going to be a great watch next Thursday night to see if Reform can overcome what's almost a 40% swing. But will that signify that, the Labour government is crumbling already? I mean, yeah, it's very exciting. We'll have to wait and see what happens.
It'll be an interesting watch. Obviously, Labour kind of have to put in a battle, so does Reform, to try and get hold of the seat. We can look at numbers all day, but what the main thing is the local elections. The polling doesn't really give us a full sense of what could happen there, because many people have different ideas when it comes to local councils than what they do at a national seat. Local people care more about when their bins get taken out and how the roads look. They'll probably look more towards how that's been run locally. If that's been run well, they'll probably not bother. They'll probably keep with the same councillors. If it's not running too well, elect new ones. This is, again, the big stress test for both main parties. First election since... first time Keir Starmer's had to sort of pressure test against the public since he got into office. First time since Kemi Badenoch got elected as leader. So it'll be interesting to see how the results, especially with the by-election, turn out.
I think both main parties are going to really struggle in these council elections. I genuinely don't see that the public have much hope in either of them. I think the Green Party will do well. I think Reform are going to do well, although I'll be interested to see, because with Reform, there's a lot of hyperactivity around them. I mean, they get a lot of press coverage. Will that actually, translate into votes? That's going to be so interesting to see. And next week, once we've got these councils, and if they win councils, then we'll know that the what the polls are saying is actually true or not. And then I think it really definitely changes the political landscape of this country.
Well, we'll have a lot more on that next week in the run-up to the local elections. Just a quick word on local Salford news. Salford Central has reopened after 10 weeks of closure. It was meant to open yesterday, although it was on Monday rather, and it was delayed until this morning. It was closed. It's been closed since the 10th of Feb. They've spent £10 million on a revamp to modernise the station, including a new roof, new upper level, and widening of the platforms. Just a couple of brief notes to bring you on that news coming out of India. They've cancelled visas, which we mentioned just now, and Indian security believe that a group called the Kashmir Resistance was behind the original attack, although that has not been verified. There's been a long-running insurgency in the Muslim-majority region since 1989, and Pakistan's government says its National Security Council would meet on Thursday. India has long accused successive governments in Islamabad of supporting armed groups in the region, which the Pakistan authorities strongly deny. That's all we know about the story at the moment, but we're going to bring you the headlines to end the programme.
Online, on the TuneIn app,
and on your smart speaker.
play Shock Radio.
This is the sound of Salford.
Shock Radio News.
A woman has been jailed over the deaths of 4 people who drowned during an organised paddleboarding trip in Pembrokeshire. Neris Lloyd has been accused of being unqualified to lead the tour and failed to get consent forms. Donald Trump has made a long social media post attacking Ukraine's leader, who he says is prolonging a killing field. The US president claims a deal on ending the war with Russia is close and that Volodymyr Zelensky can choose between peace or 3 more years of fighting before losing his country. A man who stabbed a 9-year-old girl in Dorset has been jailed for 30 years for her attempted murder. It happened just 3 weeks after the Southport killings, which Jordan Wilkes, who's 29, had researched beforehand. And mourners have remarked the stillness inside St. Peter's Basilica, where Pope Francis is currently lying in state. The Vatican is considering extending hours for the public to file past his open coffin to bring down the 8-hour-long queues.
Shock Radio weather.
There'll be a small number of heavy showers this evening, but most places will stay dry this evening and overnight, with lows of 8 degrees across Manchester. This has been the Shock Radio News Show with Alfie Mulcahy, Alfie Garner, and Benny Fiddimore.